Hey there, welcome back. It's time now to learn how to build a wobble bass. This is a ubiquitous sound in dubstep and other kind of dirty electro genres. So let's get into this. Now, the first thing we're going to do is set up our oscillators. Oscillator 1, we're going to choose a digital distorted sound. You can pretty much use any of these wavetables over here. I really like squelchy, so let's start with that one. Oscillator 2, let's activate it, and let's drop it down 2 octaves. This is going to be our sort of sub-bass oscillator, and let's set it to a sine wave like this, and then move our wavetable position all the way over to the left. The third oscillator, we'll activate it, and we'll leave it on a sawtooth wave. And now let's set up some modulation here. We're going to put the ring modulator and the phase on oscillator number 2, and we will set these down to 0 because we're going to be using a macro control on them later. And we can throw in some noise. I like the brown noise or the tape hiss, really either of these. And we're going to leave the amp down because we're going to assign a macro control to that one as well. So now let's move on to the filter section. Filter number 1 will be a scream filter. And we'll turn down the resonance a little bit. You can adjust the scream to taste. But the cutoff frequency needs to be modulated. So let's throw the 5th LFO right in there and create a really wide spread like that. You could even have it about here. And we need to move our crossfade curve up to the pure sine wave like this, because we don't want this sawtooth wave at all. So we'll move the crossfade curve up and make sure that this restart button is activated. So we're going to set the amplitude all the way down because we're going to use a macro control on that one in a moment as well. Now let's turn to our 4th envelope, which is the default modulating the amplitude section. And we're going to increase the attack actually, so we have a little bit of a sweep in there. Just like that. And make sure that your sustain level is up high, not like this. You want it up nice and high. And now we're going to throw on a couple of master effects at the end. You can choose one of these tubes, classic tube, teletube, Bronner tube. We want a nice, heavily distorted sound like that. Okay, and then you can also put on either a dimension expander just to make it a little bit bigger, or a small reverb as well if you'd prefer. Really, whichever you prefer for your own tastes. Now let's move back to LFO number 5, and we need to start building some of our macro controls that we're going to use to fine-tune that wobbly sound. And that's going to come mostly from the LFO number 5 modulating this scream cutoff frequency. Okay. Right now you don't hear any of it because the amplitude is turned down. So now we're starting to hear that. So let's take macro control number 2, set it to the amplitude target in LFO number 5, and turn the range all the way up. And let's name this You can name it wobble, pulsate, whatever you want. And then number 3, we're going to assign to the rate target, like that. And you can have your range increase over the entire course of the rate knob, but you're probably not going to want anything slower than about right here anyway. So, but really you can sort of tune that to your own preference, just like that. And so we'll call that either rate or speed or whatever you want. You can call it wob rate, whatever helps you remember what is going on. And let's take macro control number 4, set it to the amplitude in our noise generator, and create that range, that nice yellow ring all the way around the amplitude, and we can call that one noise. So let's pause for a moment and see what we have going on here. So we have a nice, pretty huge sounding bass sound that's going on. Now let's try throwing in a little bit of this wobble. So you can hear how you can hear that familiar sound start to develop. Now, a couple things in the general settings we want to talk about. We're going to go to the voicing. We're going to make it monophonic or mono rotate and set it to legato. You can have a little bit of glide. I actually like the glide on this sound. You can increase the glide time. And now when we change the rate, okay, we have some cool stuff going on. So now let's try this. Let's set the amplitude of oscillator 2 and 3 down, and let's put some macro controls in here. So I'll take macro control number 5 and create a modulation range there, and we'll call that sub because that's our low 24 semitones below or 2 octave down sub bass sound. So that's without it. We can bring it in like that. And now we can set the number 6 macro control to the amplitude of oscillator 3. Create a range there as well. And if you want to, you can change the pitch of this oscillator. You can make it something dissonant like that if you want a really dirty sound, or you can move it up 7 semitones, up 2 octaves. Really whatever is your taste for that. We can also set a macro control to this RM knob so that we can adjust some of those parameters as well. And let's actually first, let's call macro control 6, pitched, something like that, so you know this is the pitched up oscillator. And macro control 7 we can call mod. And so let's hear how that sounds. You can just hear some of that. You can also change the pitch on this modulation oscillator to create even more of a dirty kind of sound. And then you can also set the 8th macro control to either your reverb or your tube FX, if you want to be able to adjust those on the fly. Another kind of cool trick that you can do is, so now we have one type of wobble, which is with the cutoff frequency on the screen, but you can also set up, for example, a band reject filter, and you can put that 5th LFO that's doing our wobbling on the bandwidth, for example, create a range like that, and then turn up this filter output. And now I have two separate types of wobbles here, and I can use an envelope or a modulator to move in between the two. So for example, I can throw envelope 1 here and create a range over this mix of the two filters, so that it will start out on one filter and move to the other. I can drop down my sustain level, make that decay time linear. Okay, you can also maybe drop this 5th LFO on the cutoff frequency, so that's modulating as well. And I can throw in some of my noise that I've assigned to this macro control. Okay. So there are a lot of different options that you have here, and really the main takeaway is just using that nice slow LFO curve to modulate these different extreme parameters in some of these filters. Okay, and that's what gives you that wobbly sound, and then you can change the rate. You can also, of course, sync up the rate to your project like that. Okay. Or you can manage that rate knob with your macro control. And then, of course, if you're playing live, for example, or even recording this on your software, you can assign any of these, indeed any of the parameters here, by right-clicking. You can assign them to your MIDI controller by just clicking MIDI learn and then tweaking the knob on your controller. And then the nice thing, if I were to actually do that, then you would see in the browser or attributes view, you would see that you have your macro control set up here. And for example, vibrato is assigned to mod wheel 1. Or your wobble, you can you can assign, it will tell you where on your keyboard that is assigned. Alright, so that's a cool wobble bass. Play with that a little bit and check out the preset that I have saved, and we will see you in the next lecture.